Okay, let's continue along. Okay, part two, the text itself. Here's a picture of the book. Um, so, um, I'll show you the black and white. I think it'll be easier to talk about it. Okay, to read a text, a classical text, before you get into the text, there are two things you need to kind of decipher. So I'm trying to teach you how to read, right? Not modern books, obviously classical texts. The first issue, you want to look at the title of the text. That guy kind of gives you some information. So what's the title here? You can see like the first page, al-Fawz al-Kabīr fi Uṣūl al-Tafsīr. As I translate for you, the great opening in Uṣūl al-Tafsīr. So one of the things about Arabic books is the Islamic tradition, they had to come up with fancy rhyming titles for every book. Right? That's just the style. It doesn't mean a whole lot, but the idea of the title is to give you a sense of what the book is about, and then have a catchy title, right? So generally, always every Arabic book has these fancy titles. They always rhyme. There's not a whole lot that goes behind the title. Sometimes the title doesn't tell you a whole lot about a book. So I wouldn't read too much into it, because you need to understand what the title is. Now here, if you see, it says, okay, so read along like from the top line, al-Fawz al-Kabīr fi Uṣūl al-Tafsīr, that's the title. And then it gives you some information. It says, كتبه بالفارسية الإمام الشيخ المحدث أحمد ibn Abdul Rahim al-Mad'u bi-Shāh Walīullah of Delhi. And then the dates of his life. So, yeah, he was a muhaddith, yeah, absolutely. But was he only a muhaddith? That's the idea. Can you say he's the hadith scholar of India? You can, but he's not only that, right? So anyway, this book was written in Persian, in Farsi, right? So the original was written in Farsi by Shāh Walīullah. He wrote many books. He wrote over 60 books in his life. Most of them were in Arabic. Over 60% were in Arabic. But the rest of them were in Persian. Farsi was the language of the Mughal Empire, right? And that's so everyone was fluent in both Arabic and Persian at that time. And generally, the preferred language was Arabic, but the language of the courts and the politicians was Farsi, right? So the scholarly language was Arabic, the language of the courts was Farsi. So scholars generally wrote in Arabic, but often if they wanted to reach the masses, they would write in Farsi. So generally, when he writes in Farsi, trying to reach a broader audience or something. Generally, that's the case, not always. So the original was written in Persian, and it's basically a small book that gives you some of his ideas, Shāh Walīullah's ideas based on his experience and learning on what you need to know before you start interpreting or understanding the Quran. Now, it was translated into Arabic. Okay, eventually it was translated to Arabic and also Urdu, but there are three Arabic translations. There's one in the Maktaba Muniriya in Damascus by Sheikh Muhammad Munir. That's generally who it's attributed to, but we're not sure what the author is. It's a poor translation. It's one of the first translations. After that, it was translated by a number of people. This particular edition, the one that's available in PDF that I emailed you, is translated by, it tells you on the bottom of the page, Sa'id Ahmad al-Balanpuri. So in Urdu is Balanpuri. So Sa'id Ahmad is the hadith teacher, or the head of the faculty of hadith in Darul Uloom Deoband. So he's the one, and he's still alive. So he wrote, or he translated this. It's an excellent translation. He also wrote a commentary on it. But the translation, this is a translation, not the commentary. Translation is excellent. So we're going to be reading in Arabic because, obviously I don't speak Farsi, none of you do either. Maybe somebody does, I'm not sure. But Arabic is what generally this book is read in now around the world. Okay, so there are three Arabic translations. This is the one we'll be using. There's an Urdu translation by Maulana Muhammad Rafiq Chaudhry. There's an English translation by a number of scholars, but here's an English edition I was able to find. I have it in my library. So this is al-Fawz al-Kabīr fi Uṣūl al-Tafsīr The Great Victory on Qur'ānic Hermeneutics is translated by Tahir Mahmood Kiani. It's published in England. So this is pretty good translation. It's in English. It's almost all the chapters. There's one chapter missing. For some reason, they didn't translate one of the chapters. So it's not a complete translation, but it's pretty, it's most of the book. So this is hard to find. I've been searching for it, so I can order some for you guys. It's not available it's available in the UK, but if you order it, it costs like £10, but shipping is £70. So, it's hard to get from overseas books. So I was able to order like 4 copies. I'm looking at another place that I might be able to get some. So if anyone's interested, just let me know. I'll tell you how many I have. And if you're interested to buy them, we can try to get them for you. But we're not going to be using this. We'll be reading the Arabic and I'll be translating in class. So if you want it for yourself to go through the book and so you have an English translation, is excellent. But it's not like this is the text we're using, we're going through page by page. We're not going to be doing that. We're going to try to read the Arabic, okay? What else? Okay, so the first thing to understand any text, to begin to understand a text, you look at the title, you look at the publishing, where it comes from. And the second thing, you want to know what people have said about that book, right? So that's very important. What do other people say about this book? That gives you an idea, is this worth reading or not, right? Reviews. This is the same thing as reviews today. So just to give you an idea of what people have said about this book, one of the English translator, one of the first English translators, Professor Jalbani, he says, among Shāh Walīullah's best works, this is among Shāh Walīullah's best works, and one of the best works on the subject, okay? There was a great scholar in India, Sheikh Ubaidullah Sindhi. He used to be Sikh, and he converted to Islam, and he became a great scholar. And he knew some of the early teachers of Deoband. So he came to his teacher, Mahmud al-Hasan, Shaykh al-Islam Mahmud al-Hasan, and he asked him, look, so he's a convert, and just think he's a scholar, brilliant guy, convert, so he's very interested in things, and he says, he asked his teacher, Mahmud al-Hasan, I need a book on tafsir. Tafsir I just can't get. I need to get something, I need to read something that'll help me with tafsir. So Mahmud al-Hasan gave him, he said, look, read Imam Suyuti's Itqān fi Ulūm al-Qur'an. So he said, okay, and he went and then he got that book. And after many years he came back, or after some time, we don't know how much time, he came back and he said, that's not what I was looking for, I need another book. So Al-Itqān fi Ulūm al-Qur'an is a reference in Ulūm al-Qur'an by Suyuti. So it's 2 to 3 volumes, really hard to read. I don't know if anyone's read it. I've tried reading it a couple of times. I never get more than like 4 or 5 chapters. The way it's written is, basically Imam Suyuti he's a professional scholar, he was a great scholar. He compiled everything, and everything there is, he just put it together, right? So from every source. It's a great encyclopedia, but to read it as a work is very confusing, it's really hard. I remember when I started reading one Ramadan, decided I was going to read it maybe this Ramadan, not the whole book, but so like the first chapter is the verses of the Quran revealed in the summer, and it's a whole chapter, all the different sorts. Then the next chapter, the verses of the Quran revealed in the winter. Then the next chapter, the verses of the Quran revealed in daytime. Then the next chapter, verses of the Quran revealed in the nighttime. Then a chapter, verses of the Quran revealed on land. Then a whole separate chapter, verses of the Quran revealed on the sea. Then the verses of the Quran revealed in the spring. So it's just a massive encyclopedia. If you're trying to understand, to get a blueprint, a map, it's very hard to use a reference like that.
I already know though.
Huh?
Like, is there references in the hadith?
He was a compiler. A lot of the stuff isn't sound. A lot of the stuff is. So it's just his job. Like what he did was, every source out there, he just brought it together, and so he wasn't a researching scholar, just like trying to evaluate what's right or wrong. But there are a lot of views that from Suyuti's Itqān that Orientalists use. I remember there's a lot of confusion in Muslim circles, and they're always quoting Suyuti. I remember one of my friends when I was in college. He did the Alim course and he came back, and we had a debate, and it became really huge controversy in our community. So his idea, or he said basically that the Quran was revealed, and it was in a different order, which we know about. But the order of the surahs in the Quran, Surah al-Fatiha all the way to Surah al-Nas, is not from the Prophet. It came from much later in Uthman's time. And that was like revolutionary for us. I mean, it was shocking to us. How could the Quran not have an order? How could the surahs not be like the juz and the surahs not have an order? So he said no, he was adamant. That's what he learned. Why? Because he read Suyuti's Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran. And when we debated, like he was like, that was his reference. And he said, look it up. And when we looked it up, Suyuti actually mentions that as a view. But is it the right view? It is not. I mean, there's no way the Prophet read the entire Quran beginning to end twice in Ramadan in the last year of his life without there having been an order. The companion would never have played with the Quran and without an order. So the point is, he concluded everything in al-Itqan. And when you include everything and you're not an exacting scholar, then it can lead to confusion. And for Shaykh Ubaidullah Sindhi, it wasn't good enough for him. And same thing, Shaykh Ubaidullah from Piscataway, I had the same experience. Yes?
Yeah, there was a Quran that was distributed back in the late 70s or so, that was based on that order. It was done by some Orientalists.
The chronological order?
In the Itqan order.
Okay, so Itqan, he includes a chronological order. Yes. So there is a chronological order, yes. First verse is revealed with Iqra, we know that. And then last verse, وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ. So there is a chronological order. So Allah revealed it, so we kind of know that. We probably don't know every single verse, but that's a different order from when it was written down and recited in Salah. So we believe there's an order, like from Fatiha to An-Nas, as well as being revealed chronologically. So I don't think he discusses that here. He might discuss that in this work. We'll see, inshallah. So where was I? Okay, so back to Shaykh Ubaidullah Sindhi. So he went back to Shaykh Mahmud. He said, this is not what I was looking for. And then he said, okay, you know what? Read this. So he gave him this, al-Fawz al-Kabīr. Then he came back. He said, you know what? This is exactly what I needed. This is what I was looking for. And this is good enough for me. So that's what one scholar said about this book. Now, Sheikh Abul Hasan Nadwi, he's a great scholar. He wrote an introduction to this book. I don't know if it's in this edition, but it is in the edition I emailed you. There's a workbook. I have his introduction in there in the workbook, in one of the pages. So I'll just go through what he said about this book, and we'll end with that. This is, he wrote an introduction to this book. So you want to know why this book is important. You want to know why we should be studying this book. What's so special about this book? So here's another great scholar, Sheikh Abul Hasan Ali Nadwi, great author and thinker and scholar, who said this about this particular book. So he said, I have the first paragraph on the screen. So he said, إن كتاب الإمام الدهلوي الفوز الكبير في أصول التفسير ثرة تجديدية ثورية في صدد الدعوة إلى القرآن. So I'll tell you in English, so we don't read the Arabic just to save time. So he said a few things. He said 5 things about this book. He said, number 1, this book has a revolutionary reformist influence in the da'wah to the Quran. So the first point he makes is the da'wah to the Quran, calling people to understand Quran, to study Quran. This particular book has a great influence in that, and it's a reformist, revolutionary influence. That's the words he used. Tajdidiyatun thawriyatun. Tajdeed. Remember I said he's a mujaddid. Same ideas. You have to understand this is his style. Number 2, he says about this book, Sheikh Abul Hasan, this develops the faculties of understanding and reflection of the Quran among scholars. So it's a book written for the scholars to develop their faculties of understanding the Quran, to make them more astute in understanding the Quran. Number 3, he says, إيقاظ عاطفة الإصلاح للأمة الإسلامية. This book awakens a sense of reform for the ummah. So again, that same idea of reform and revival. This book kind of gives you, his book is not just an academic book. It's meant to inspire the ummah, to wake them up and bring them back to the original spirit of the Quran and Sunnah. So it's a reformist spirit that you can find in this book. And then he says, it's a unique book. إنه لكتاب فريد في المكتبة الإسلامية العامرة حسب علمنا في بابه. He says it's a unique book without parallel in the library of Islam. So this is Abu Hasan Ali. This is the 4th point. He says this is a book, there's no book like that in the whole library of Islam. And then he elaborates, he says, why? Because he says, prior to this, there was never an independent work written on the principles of tafsir. There was never an independent book written on the principles Uṣūl al-Tafsīr. But all there was people who wrote mufassirin, who wrote their tafsir books, Tabari and Qurtubi. Like throughout their tafsir books, they allude to their methodology. Or sometimes some of the tafsir books in the beginning, in the introduction, the muqaddimah, they might have some of their principles. But as far as a book by itself, an independent book that just lists the principles, according to Abu Hassan al-Nadwi, there was no book prior to him. Now, there's a caveat. There is a book, another great book that needs to be studied, al-Muqaddimah fi Uṣūl al-Tafsīr by Ibn Taymiyyah. So it's also very similar. It's called al-Muqaddimah, an introduction to the principles of tafsir. So it actually was a book, perhaps either he wasn't aware of it or he didn't consider that book to be comprehensive enough. So this work is probably more comprehensive. Yes?
Does he touch in on all of the various tafsir in terms of what each one covers? Like if one
No.
is based on fiqh,
He's not interested in human
one
works. He doesn't care about he's interested in the kalam of Allah. So he's going to give you what the stories in the Quran mean. How do you understand the stories? What is asbab al-nuzul? He doesn't care about what human beings wrote about tafsir. That's a different thing. So this is Uṣūl al-Tafsīr. How do you understand the kalam of Allah directly? So he's going to bring us to the Quran directly. There's not a lot of references to other books.
But he doesn't categorize them as, let's say, this one is dealing with fiqh or this one
No,
is dealing with...
he doesn't care about it. That's not his concern here. Yes.
Was there something going on that he felt the need to try to revive?
Yeah, there was something going on. I mean, what's going on is the same thing that's going on today. And when it comes to tafsir, there's so many opinions and views about everything, right? So there's so many ideas and so many conflicting views. And does this verse only apply to the mushrikeen or does it apply to everyone? So there's a lot of confusion like that that's still going on today, and it's always going to go on. So he was addressing some of the confusion he found in his time. So when we look at next week, we're going to read the Muqaddimah, the introduction that he wrote himself. So in his introduction, he will write why he wrote the book, and we'll get a little sense of that. But he was addressing problems of his time, of course. We don't know exactly what they were, but we have kind of like a sense from reading the book. But when you read them, you'll see it's the same problems we have today. Yes?
Could you repeat the name of the work written by him?
Yeah, al-Muqaddimah fi Uṣūl al-Tafsīr. That's also a mark. Yeah, it's in English too. It's not the best translation, but that's a great work. So that's a brilliant work, but it's misunderstood. Like so that my Shaykh Akram Nadwi is writing an Arabic critical edition, and with some commentary. So that's also a great work. I was debating for the Dawah conference. I was going to do a session either on that book or this book, and they picked this book. So that's also a great book. We could have a seminar on that. I just happened to pick this because I studied it. So that's the fourth point. That's unique. There's nothing written like that before. The fifth point he makes is that this book is a brief summary, but it also includes comprehensive principles. So that's a good thing about this book. It's very brief. It's not that big, but also it's just some ideas and reflections of Shāh Walīullah, but they're very comprehensive. You can use them like a blueprint or a map. Okay. And he says, this is, so Shaykh Ali Nadwi says, this is very insightful. He says, some of the principles concerning the meanings of the Quran that Shāh Walīullah recorded, based upon his insight and experience and comprehension. Just listen. You don't have to necessarily write it down. Some of the principles and maxims concerning the meanings of the Quran that Shāh Walīullah recorded, based upon his insight and experience and comprehension, cannot be attained by reading hundreds of pages of other works. So he is able to summarize like insight that you can get from hundreds of pages in just a few pages. So that's one of the characteristics Shāh Walīullah is able to summarize in a very amazing way. So then he talks about, and I'll summarize. I don't want to go into all the what he says. I mean, we can. But one of the things he says, so Shaykh Ali Nadwi, he says one of his contributions is this. He says about asbab al-nuzul. There's a great confusion and tension, and it still exists today. What is asbab al-nuzul? Sabab nuzul. What does that mean?
Reasons for revelation.
The reasons for revelation, right? So every verse that's revealed, right, it came in the Prophet's lifetime in a certain context based on a certain reason, right? Maybe some battle that happened or some event that happened or question that was asked. So there's a whole science developed by Muslim scholars called asbab al-nuzul, the science of the reasons for revelation, causes for revelation. So there are scholars that when you study this discipline, right, there's a thing that happens. Now you take a verse of Quran, right? If you emphasize the asbab al-nuzul too much, then the verse becomes applicable only there, and it's not applicable to you. Then you kind of reduce the universality of the Quran, right? It diminishes that. If you get rid of asbab al-nuzul and you say this verse is revealed to me and you, it's a universal book, you just read the Quran for what it is, then it becomes more universal. But then sometimes you miss out on some of these things. So what is the balance there? Right? That tension's always been there. So he has an interesting and unique way and approach to that. He has his own ideas how to approach. So he doesn't believe in asbab al-nuzul too much. He says everything that the scholars wrote, or the majority of what they wrote about asbab al-nuzul, is not really asbab al-nuzul. It's just finding narrations that happen to fit. But that's not the reason the verse was revealed. So he makes a profound point. He says, maybe I can find just that line. He says the reason for the revelation of the verses of the Quran was a reminder for the lack of awareness of people, to lack of awakening of people. It was there to raise awareness, to wake each and every one of us up, and to see the favors of Allah Azza wa Jal, to see our varying circumstances, to see death and what lies beyond death. So the Quran is revealed for everyone. So don't take the asbab al-nuzul to restrict the Quran. And that's something people in da'wah do a lot, right? Like, just to get away complex, it's a verse that's very difficult, or hard to explain to non-Muslims, that's talking about the Quraysh in Makkah, the polytheist. It doesn't apply to me and you. It doesn't apply to this country or that country, right? So we tend to do that, and we kind of fall on that and then non-Muslims, okay. We thought it was meant for all of us, right? So that's asbab al-nuzul. That's what we do, right? But so Shāh Walīullah is against that. He says no. The reason there's verses there, for every verse has a lesson for us. It's meant for us to have a lesson. We have to kind of figure out what that lesson is, right?
But that doesn't negate, like, for example, specific incidents. For example, would be Uṣūl al-Kahf.
Yeah. So he's going to get into. There's a chapter on that. So I'm not gonna. That's why I'm not going into detail. There is asbab al-nuzul. So he said. So for him, asbab al-nuzul is very minimal. He says the reason we need it is to understand few incidents that the Quran refers to, like Ashab al-Kahf, like Dhul Qarnayn and things like that. The things that the Quraysh used to do that the Quran condemns. إِنَّمَا النَّسِيءُ زِيَادَةٌ فِي الْكُفْرِ, the idea of nasi. وَالَّذِينَ يُظَاهِرُونَ مِنْكُمْ, those of you who declare dhihar on their wives, to understand that. So to understand these words, you have to understand what they mean through asbab al-nuzul. But that does not mean the verse was just about that. It's for. So he's kind of against that restricting of the Quran. But we'll get into this, a whole chapter on that. And then the last thing he says, then he lists some of the highlights of this book. And some of the highlights he says is, this book explains the weaknesses of various groups that the Quran refutes. So he talks about groups. So there's a group psychology is here in the for Shāh Walīullah. That's huge. The Quran talks about 4 major groups for him, and he said among human beings, everyone falls into one of these 4 groups. So again, that universalist mind. So for him, even when he looks at what are these 4 groups: Jews, Christians, Mushrikeen, and Munafiqeen. So he talks about the Jews, and then he talks about the Christians, and he says the Christians of our time. Who are they? So he's making it universal. He says when Allah talks about the Christians, it's a general principle. Anyone who does the same thing that they do, the same thing applies to them. Then he mentions among the Muslims today, who are the modern day Christians in the Muslim community. And then the Jews, he says, who are the modern day Jews among the Muslim community. Then the Mushrikeen, who are the modern day Mushrikeen among the Muslim community. Those are people who visit graves and things like that. So he's relating everything to his times, so making the Quran very universal. And then he proposes solutions to many difficult problems. He has a great grasp of grammar. So basically, the last line, Sheikh Hassan Ali Nadwi says, the most distinguishing feature of this work is that the reader can ascertain the real weaknesses of the previous faiths and the deviant groups and the diseases that were handed down generation to generation. So the Quran gives you a model of these various deviations that human beings fall into, and it kind of gives you like the root cause analysis. Why? So that Muslim generations can raise the Quranic mirror to themselves in order to prevent these same diseases from falling into them. So nobody can say, you know what, that's talking about Christians. Alhamdulillah, I'm not Christian. That's talking about mushrikeen. Alhamdulillah, none of us are mushrikeen. But Shāh Walīullah says every one of us can fall into those traps. That's why the Quran shares those verses with us. So this is a great summary of, a great introduction to why this book is important. Actually, let's read the first line, and then we'll close with that. So we're not going to read the Muqaddimah today, but let's just read the first paragraph. I don't want to leave any class without reading the book. So every class will also read the book. So, and I'm going to need, so when you read a text, we have people from the audience who read. That's the traditional way. So we're going to, in Arabic, so we're going to read just the first paragraph is here in front of you in Arabic. Let me see. Yeah. So we're going to read the first paragraph. Everyone, don't everyone raise your hands. You want to read? Yeah. I'll be calling on if you don't read. If you're interested in reading throughout the class, just let me know. So this is in your folders. So actually this is in your folders. The Muqaddimah of the book is in your folders. Okay? There's 2 pages, very short Muqaddimah. We're not going to read it, we're just going to read the first paragraph. Next week we're going to finish the Muqaddimah. So the Muqaddimah is very important. To understand any text, any matan, I mentioned 2 things, this is the third. First thing is you understand the title. Second thing, you understand what other people have said about this book. And the third, you read the Muqaddimah of the author himself, if he's written one. And that'll give you a sense of why he wrote the book and some of the motivation. Okay, Fadl. Bismillah ar-Rahman.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم مقدمة الكتاب آلاء الله تعالى على هذا العبد الضعيف لا تعد ولا تحصى وأجلها التوفيق لفهم القرآن العظيم.
Okay, so stop there. So the first thing he says, and so I'll translate for you. Ala'ullahi, ala fabi'ayyi ala rabbikum. What does it mean? Favors. So he says the favors of Allah exalted upon this weak slave are so many they cannot be enumerated or encompassed, right? So he's talking about himself. So Abdul Da'if, generally when people say that, they're talking about themselves and using a humble way of expression. So he says basically, the first thing he's saying, the favors of God are so great upon this humble slave, myself, that I can't even begin to enumerate them. And then he says, what's the greatest favor of Allah upon him? Ajalluha? So what ajalluha, the greatest blessing and favor of Allah, is tawfiq, the ability لِفَهْمِ الْقُرْآنِ الْعَظِيمِ, to understand the Qur'an al-Azim, the noble Qur'an, the great Qur'an. So Shāh Walīullah saying about himself, Allah blessed me with so many things. The greatest blessing I enjoy is that Allah gave me tawfiq to understand the Qur'an. So, just that line, what does that tell you? It tells you, one is that for him the greatest thing is Qur'an. He puts the Qur'an above everything else. So for him, all the things he studied hadith, he studied fiqh, kalam, so many things. But the greatest blessing for him is that Allah allowed him to understand the words of Allah. Right? That tells you his priority with the Quran. Okay? And read the next.
ومنن صاحب النبوة والرسالة عليه الصلاة والسلام وعلى أحقر الأمة كثيرة.
Okay. Now he says, there are many blessings, tremendous blessings of our master, the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on this ummah and upon the least of this ummah. And who's ahqar al-ummah? Ahqar is the least. He's talking about himself. So generally Muslim authors, when they write, when they refer to themselves, they use like these forms of humility. So he says, and the blessings and the graces of the messenger of Allah to this entire ummah, including the least of them, like myself, are numerous as well. So, and then وَأَعْظَمُهَا.
وأعظمها تبليغه صلى الله عليه وسلم الفرقان الكريم.
Okay, and the greatest from the Prophet's blessings upon the Ummah is his tabligh, his relating to us what? Al-Furqan al-Kareem, which is the Quran. The Furqan is the Quran. So the greatest blessing the Prophet gave us is that he gave us the Quran. So this goes back to Allah Azza wa Jal. So, and that's who he is, Rasulullah. He's a messenger of Allah. So again, this is the same thing coming back to the Quran. So in these two lines, so just to give you an idea, just his brilliance. How do Muslims begin anything they do, any talk, any book? They begin with, what's the formula? What do we say in a speech? Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulullah. I mean, Bismillah also. But generally, when you get into a talk or a book or a topic, we begin with hamd, we begin praising Allah, and then we bring salutations upon the messenger. That's generally the style of the adab of Islamic address. And generally you start with hamd, praising the blessings of Allah, praising Allah for his blessings, and then the Prophet. So that's what he's doing here. But when you have brilliant scholars like that, it's boring or just to say Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala, or it's not enough for them. So they'll do that, but they'll give you more than that. So he did that in these two lines. The first thing is hamd. The blessings of Allah upon us are enormous. That's a tafsir of Alhamdulillah. But he did it in his own way to give a message also. And then the second line is وَمِنَنُ صَاحِبِ النُّبُوَّةِ. This is وَالصَّلَاةُ وَالسَّلَامُ عَلَىٰ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ. So he's saying the blessings of the Prophet are enormous upon us. And what are they? The greatest of them, that he gave us the Quran. He transmitted and taught us the Quran. So again, this is his way of translating Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Also, the other thing from these two lines, you see his priority with the Quran. In the first line, it's the Quran. In the second line with the Prophet is also Quran. So for him, Quran is the only thing, is the greatest thing. Okay, continue.
لقن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم القرآن الجيل الأول وهم أبلغوه للجيل الثاني وهلم جرا حتى بلغ هذا الضعيف أيضا حظ من روايته ودرايته.
Okay. Now this is just continuing that same second line that the Prophet transmitted the Quran to us. That's the greatest blessing of his. He says, لقن النبي صلى الله. So the first generation was given the Quran al-Jail al-Awwal. The Prophet gave the Quran to the first generation, al-Jail al-Awwal, and then they gave it to the second generation, and then they gave it to the next generation, وَهَلُمَّ جَرًا, until it reached us. And he said, until it reached this هذا الضعيف, this weak slave, talking about himself again. Okay, and he's saying, so this gives you a sense of that Shāh Walīullah, he has good sense of hadith, and he's a traditionalist. So he knows the sense of history is very strong for him. So it's not just the Quran came to the Prophet, now we have it today. He's linking it to us with the historical process. So he says the Prophet gave the Quran or taught the Quran to the first generation, they taught it to the second generation, and then on and on until it reached this slave today. And he says, حَظًّا مِنْ رِوَايَتِي وَدِرَايَتِي, a portion of his understanding and his riwayah reached me today. So he's not claiming that he understands everything about the Quran, but he said, I received a portion of that from the Prophet to the first, to the second, to the third. Why is he saying that? Because he believes in isnad, he believes in hadith, he studied hadith, he knows that linking ourselves with our teachers, from their teachers, that historical tradition is very important. So this opening just gives you a sense of the historical importance. And then he says, just read the next line. Allahumma salli ala.
اللهم صل على هذا النبي الكريم سيدنا ومولانا وشفيعنا أفضل صلواتك وأيمن بركاتك وعلى آله وأصحابه وعلماء أمته أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
Now it's just continuing the salatu wassalam, blessings and salutations on the Prophet, his companions, and all the people of knowledge of the Ummah until the end of time. So this is just the first paragraph of the Muqaddimah. So that's how you're supposed to read. Read to get a sense of why do you think he's using these words? It gives you an idea of his style. It gives you an idea how they approach things. It gives you an idea how he placed the Quran above everything else, and how he believes in the tradition. And we haven't even got into Amma Ba'd. So next week we'll again start with Amma Ba'd and give you an idea what the rest of the things that he wants to tell us in the Muqaddimah, as well as some introduction. So with that, we'll end this session. I know it's the first session we kind of went over. We'll try to minimize that, inshallah. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. So the book is in your when you register. I sent it to you by email. So the PDFs. The print is hard to find. You can't find it anywhere. This printed you can find in the Middle East.
What about the Arabic one?
Even the Arabic, I don't know where you get it in America. And this one is hard to find in America. I'm trying to get some copies, but I'll let you know about the English. But you have the PDF, so you can either print it out or read it from your devices. Yeah, sure, take a look at it. Oh, yeah, go ahead. So there's 2 sign-in sheets. Whoever's here, make sure you don't leave without putting your name on the sign-in sheet and your email, just so I have your email so we can communicate, inshallah. I'll see you next week. Especially the guys, there are a lot of guys here. I only see about 7, 8 names. So make sure everyone puts their name here, inshallah.
Some people are on evaluation now, first class.
No, yeah, I just want the name. This is not about anything. I just need your name so I can know who's here.
I wanted to know, because I wanted a copy of that.
The English?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're the first one that asks. I'll put you in a priority list.
Oh, thank
I'm
you.
gonna I have a few already. I'm gonna just I'll try to get it.
All right, I appreciate it.
You got this from Saudi?
I don't remember where I got it from. I'm not sure. Maybe. Or I asked somebody who went to Umrah to get it from me.
So just put my name, that's it?
Just your name, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll keep a list here, and I'll try to get, sorry.
Khalas, inshallah. So trying to pay for it. We're gonna see if we can do it again. If not, next week, inshallah.
Yeah,
All right.
take your time. Next week,
All
you
right.
can bring your check.
Thank you so much, bro.
Even the week after.
Okay, sounds good.
You know, if you really need copies of those books, you can send me to England. I will go pick up like a whole case of them.
At your expense?
At your expense.
No, I could pay the $70 shipping cost.
For one, how long is that per book? Or no?
Sure. No, okay. It's fine. This is yours?
No, this
Who gave me this phone?
I don't know. It's on Amazon.
No, I know, but there are only 4 copies on Amazon, and I got them. So this one, maybe, and it's not Prime. I think.
There was one on Prime. I already bought it. So
Yeah, so there was one of them had only 4 in stock. I got that. I got those yesterday. But we'll keep looking. I mean, this one is $3.99 shipping, so it looks like they do have it. But only one left in stock.
yeah, but there's like 4 or 5 sellers, so each one has one in stock.
I found one in okay. I found one in Philadelphia in a bookstore. But I emailed them, they haven't gotten back to me yet. I might have a bunch.
How long is it supposed to last?
Till Ramadan.
No, the sessions are hour long, hour and a half.
Hour and a half.
Hour and a half.
Yeah, but I'm going to try to make it less than that, inshallah. Like, how are you? Good to see you. Yeah. Where are you living?
Warren these days. Just take a picture of this.
Yeah, sure.
Here you go. This is the sister's.
Do that too.
I haven't formally registered for the class.
No problem. Just put your name and you can, you have to show them.
I'll probably pay next week.
No, that I'm not worried about. That's just none, you guys. So just put your name down. So you have it?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So going forward, if you stay, you can have the 10 days. Sure. How's work?
Alhamdulillah. Where you work? I got late today. It was Morristown. I had some training to finish.
Morristown's close, huh?
It's it's just they're late, like 7:30. There's training going on today, so I had to finish some.